Hi, everyone. My name is Savannah Frierson. I am on the programming committee for Black Ink Book Festival, and we are so excited to have Miss Monique Patterson with us. Monique Patterson is the VP Editorial Director Acquisitions Outreach at St. Martin Publishing Group at Macmillan. Her more recent titles have been New York Times bestselling, uh, U- sorry, New York Times bestseller Glory, Magical Visions of Black Beauty by Karen and Regis Betancourt. The second in a young adult trilogy, New York Times bestseller Only Spiked by PC and Kristen Cast. The young edition of Can't Stop, Won't Stop, a hip hop history by award winner Jeff Chang and Davey D. Promise That You Will Sing About Me, The Power and Poetry of Kendrick Lamar by Miles Marshall Lewis, as well as the upcoming The Abolitionist Handbook, 12 Steps to Changing Yourself and the World by New York Times bestselling author Patrice Cullors. Finding books and authors that reach across breadth and experience as humans is important for Miss Monique Patterson. Reading and publishing books that reflect who we are as a people, all of the things that make us wonderfully different and also connect to each other, can be one of the most powerful accomplishments of a book. She believes readers are all searching for that every day. So, welcome, 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 Miss Monique Patterson. We're so excited to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Happy New Year.
Happy New
Can
Year.
you believe we're in week two? That's crazy.
No.
But here we are, and we're going to have a wonderful conversation. So, we're going to start right out the gate. What was the book that got you interested in a publishing career?
Oh my God. There was no one book. I I was always an avid reader, just about. I think that's the case for probably everyone who's on this call right now. I was just an avid reader since I was a little kid. And, um, when I was about to go to college, I had to decide, what my major was. And everybody wants to know what you want to be. And I was like, I don't know what I want to be. um, but I was an English major. That's what I decided I wanted to, do. And, right before I graduated, I thought I wanted to go into law, and did a internship at the New York City Criminal Court, and it was amazing and fascinating. And I was like, this is definitely not what I want to do. I want to be where books are. And all I knew about publishing is that that was where they made the books. That's
Right.
it. I didn't know anything else. And so I was just like, okay, that's where I want to, that's what I want to get into. And back then it was a different world, and how you got in and whatnot. So I actually sent my resume out blind to 5 different publishers, and I got a call from Avon Books like the next day, and they were like, do you like romance? And I was like, I love romance. So
Part
I
two.
started, yeah, at Avon Books, right, like a week after I graduated
Oh,
from college, and I haven't looked back since. So it was just my love of books and my desire to work with books that, you know, um, I guess you could just attribute it to the very first book I read, which whatever that was, I don't even remember.
sometimes you don't remember, and sometimes you know precisely the book. And for
Hmm.
me, it was Roll Up Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor,
Oh my God.
because that was the very first book I remember reading that featured a young black protagonist, and I
Hmm.
think I was like fifth grade. And I was just, and I was so enraptured about the story that I didn't even realize this was set in the 1930s. It
Hmm.
felt that contemporary to me as a girl, and growing up in the 90s, which says a lot about how things have changed. I mean, they have, but my goodness, like if we're, if I'm like, yeah, Cassie, you tell him, Cassie.
Yes.
So that was the story that really got me excited about books, about wanting to be a part of however you create that. And how I got into publishing was I didn't want to go home from college. So I answered the ad for proofreading, and that's how I entered it. So,
Right. Yeah.
funnily enough, it was you realizing, yeah, I don't want to do this. And then for me, it's like, I can't go home again. Like, once you leave the nest, you kind of like, so it was really exciting. And so just the fact that Avon was so excited to hire you, I'm pretty sure you just to know like A, I get to work in an industry that I love, and B, I get to work with a
Mhm.
genre that I love. And
Yes.
that goes to my one of my second questions. What drew you to being an advocate for genre fiction and romance in particular?
Oh, I mean, I've been a genre girl from the beginning. So interestingly enough, um, I mean, I've been reading for a long time. Like I remember my mom had us in reading is fundamental, the RIF program. So like since I was little, but I remember being particularly like my first moment when I became really interested in science fiction,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't publish, but that was like my first memory of being introduced to genre. I'm sure there was something before this, but it was watching, I don't know, somebody's version of War of the Worlds, and I was just like, oh my god. And that was after that I found this like hunger, and I always loved love stories, so it was I got into the teen romances and then the adult romances. So there was a lot, in a lot of different ways, I was always interested in genre. And then I was such a fast reader, even back then as a kid, like I would get like 12 books out of the library, finish them in a week and a half, have to go through, go back and get more, and eventually I went through their entire romance section, so I had to start branching out to other genres. So I started reading mysteries, and that started with like Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, and then I grew out of that, and then I wanted to read more fantasy, and then I wanted to read more science fiction, and then so it just kept going like that. But my main, I always loved genre fiction. I
Right.
always loved um, the storylines, and you know there was the writer was good. There was always, I knew that there were certain things that it was always going to provide for me, and the
Right.
best writers provided for me in a way that was still a wild ride.
Right.
So yeah.
Because especially romance, it gets, let's just say, not the respect it's due, given
Yes.
especially how much you kind of prop up the rest of the. And I say we because I do write romance, and this is a festival that's celebrating romance.
Hmm.
You kind of prop up the rest of the publishing industry, and people turn their nose up at it or make very derogatory comments. But I'm sure there's some really deft handling of language, of
Hmm.
imagery, all to get you to fall in love with a couple or more, because we do that now, um, every time, and make it fresh and make it new and interesting. How do you help communicate that with when you go into acquisition meetings, or when you sit at panels that have multiple genres on it, and you might hear those, oh, romance or what have we kind of create safe spaces, as with romance is very good at creating their own safe spaces, but just being where you have gotten in the publishing industry as one of the top executive editors and VPs, like how do you continue that push in the broader publishing sphere?
I mean, I think, well, the first thing is that there's nothing that I publish that I ever apologize for. There's no apology walking into the room. It is, first of all, like in publishing, most sales forces have, especially if you're at a commercial publisher, if you're at a house where it's mostly literary, you're most likely not doing genre romance anyway.
Right.
But most commercial houses are used to selling the whole breadth of books. They sell science fiction, they sell mystery, etc. And those are huge revenue streams. So within publishing, I've never had to explain, well, why are we doing romance? It's, I've walked through the door and it's already a part of, a major part of their business. So I've actually never had to, hear the groans or anything, because we're talking to people who already know how to sell it, and have been doing it for years, and we've been publishing it for years, and including like panels that I go and speak on. I'm a commercial publisher, like even outside of genre, my list is completely commercial. There's only been a couple of literary titles that I've published over the course of my career. So when I accept a panel, I'm going to speak to people who write in that category. And also, I'm usually up there with people who speak on, who rather work in that those categories or genres or within commercial fiction. It would be, I've never gone to, I mean, in my business, I have to go and speak to the authors that I want to acquire and the people who want to sell my book. So I actually don't deal with that a whole lot. I'm aware of it, I'm aware of it, which I've experienced more coming in from like, reviewers, not like romance reviewers, but other people outside of, kind of the process of making books. They fall into those old stories about what romance is and it's not. And most of the time, they are not familiar with the genre at all. But within the industry, it's more about like how you're pitching individual titles more so than having to explain why romance is great. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then kind of following through that, because you have had people who understand what it is you do and why you do it, how has your personal mission and in your approach to publishing and acquiring and mentoring both editors and authors, how has that evolved over the course of your career?
So that's a really good question. I'm going to try my best to answer it in a coherent way.
Right. As I asked, like, this might be a little large, but that's okay.
I mean, I think that the easiest way to explain that is I think there has to be a constant examination of what is required of you, and a certain amount of flexibility. And I think that you always have to be asking the question, is this relevant? Is it still relevant? Is this still the way to do it? Is it challenging your own ways of thinking? Being in conversation with other people who think differently from you so that your thinking can also be challenged. And I think, the world around you changes. And if you're not, as long as you don't have your head in the sand, you're going to realize that there are things that you constantly need to be in consideration of, um, as you are growing as a human being in the category, in the area in which you work, or anything, especially if you want to continue to do good work and you want to continue to be relevant. So I think that's the most kind of broad stroke way I can explain how I generally try to approach it. It's required different things of me. It required me to think in different ways. It's required me to release certain things and learn new things, and it's ever changing. And I think especially in these last 2 years, there's so many things that I'm still learning about, not only myself as a human being, but as myself as a human being within my family, myself as a human being within all the different communities, myself as a human being, as a manager, as an editor, as a publisher, as, all these different things, and what people are hungry for and what's speaking to us now. What do we need? What do I need? What do they need? So there's a lot of I think honest questioning. Sometimes you're asking yourself questions that you don't want to answer, but I think that's what's necessary. So I hope that explains kind of like what it's always changed throughout the years, the process.
Like what you're saying is just a constant interrogation of
Yes.
where your true north is.
Yes.
Walk
Yeah.
that path.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's funny that you mentioned the last 2 years because the last 2 years have been the last 2 years. But the last 2 years also, unfortunately, starting with Ahmaud Arbery and then going to Breonna Taylor, then going to George Floyd, and then going to so many other names that should not even be names that we know for the reasons that we do.
Mhm.
I distinctly remember all these companies, especially in the publishing industry, saying how they're going to start amplifying and listening and advocating for marginalized voices and Black voices in particular. And now that we are almost 2 years out of that, what has that looked like for you with Macmillan, and what have you seen that look like with your contemporary publishers? And do you think that they are actually, you know, living up to the vows that they said back in 2020 when everything
Right.
was really at its peak?
Yeah. So I'll try my best to speak. I can speak to what I see in, at St. Martin's and in Macmillan. Other companies, I don't know, I don't know. So, you know, we've we started these. Okay, so to back it up, I've been at St. Martin's Press, which is part of Macmillan, for the end of November made 21 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been there for quite some time.
Yeah.
So the conversations that we're having today, and even conversations about the lack of diversity within the publishing industry, began in earnest at Macmillan, in a very public way within the company. I would say somewhere between 5 to 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And, it started at an internal meeting where somebody says, "What are we doing about this?" And our CEO said, "Well, we should have this conversation." And it began the formation of the D&I Council, which was all employee, people who volunteered their time, for it. And I was the co-chair along with another colleague of mine of the DEI Council. And that's when I think the conversation started in earnest.
Mm-hmm.
And what has happened over the years is that basically the heat has gotten turned up more and more because things are not getting better. The heat has gotten turned up more and more. And, the voices on social media have been not letting people off the hook, that those voices have continually gotten louder, which is what happens when you have a people who feel like they are not being listened to. Like they're going to try and speak, and the more you refuse to listen to them, the more they're going to try and make themselves and will make themselves heard.
Okay.
So that has been, I think, one of the interesting things is that I've never in my entire time in publishing have talked about diversity, about race, had uncomfortable conversations as much as I've had within work,
Mm-hmm.
as I've had in the last 5 to 6 years. And that was a very big shift, for me. I'm a Black woman in publishing. There's not that many of us. There's not many Black people. There still aren't that many Black people in publishing. It's changing, but it's like trying to change an industry that has a system that's been in place for hundreds and hundreds of years is like, and trying to move that is like, it really is like trying to shift an iceberg,
Right.
So there are times when it feels like you've done something significant, and there's times when it feels like you're just like, it's like going at a snail's pace, But I think we are still in this place where it's not just it used to be that one part of the industry was having this conversation, right? It would be like editors who are saying, "Yep, we need more of this," and then it would be like booksellers who were saying, "We need more of this." And this is the first time in the history of publishing, in my time, where all parts of our industry are being held accountable, for it. So everybody's having the same conversation at the same time. Also, the workforce is changing. The people who are coming in, the younger people who are coming into this business are also, they're in there being like, no, we're not doing this.
Right.
So there's agitation that's happening on the outside and on the inside. you know,
Mhm.
and that's because also of a generational, a generational change that's happening as well. And I'm all for it. Like it's nice to have other voices, in the room. It's nice to, you know, look across the table and be on a Zoom call and be like, my God, we've got this many Black folks in the company. This is great. So it is something that is happening. It is frustratingly slow. And there are things that I'm really hopeful about, presently. And I have a lot of reasons and a lot of time in the business to be jaded about it. But I feel particularly hopeful right now about what we might be able to, accomplish. And the thing is that it's going to require some consistency over a long period of time to continue to shift that.
Right.
So the kind of work that we're doing is not just about like, oh, let's get a bunch of books by, people who are underrepresented. It has to be every part of the business talking about like, well, how do we publish these books? How do we reach the audiences, etc. And I think that's how you can build consistent success, if everybody's invested in it. And that's where things are right now. So, you know, we're trying to like not just jump on it, but also establish some things that are going to have some long lasting effects in terms of supporting everything that we're trying to do. So today, I'm very hopeful. There's a lot of work to be done. A lot. A lot.
I just know from the author side, it's kind of like, shout out to Sunshine Anderson. We heard it all before, right? And then to quote another song, what have you done for me lately? So it was, we just like, okay, we heard this in 2015. We heard
Mhm.
this every time a major, unfortunate extrajudicial killing. But okay, why is this different? But
Mhm.
I also want to say that part of me, and I'm only going to speak for myself, it did feel a little different because, like you said, it was top down. It
Mhm.
wasn't just the same editors who have always been advocating for this. It
Mhm.
wasn't just the big name authors, at least and I'm speaking primarily from romance, saying y'all got to do better. I mean, again, speaking from the romance perspective, 2019 was when things came to a head
Yeah.
for a lot of us with RWA. So,
Mhm.
when that happened and then 2020 happened, it's like, okay, so now you say this, but now we're actually going to hold you accountable to that.
Yeah.
But I think to your point, one of the ways with that top down conversation and that support is to have, editors in particular who can help usher that along. And in
Mhm.
the earlier panel, one of our panelists, Reese Ryan, was like, it would be nice, to have, black editors and other editors of color effectively be in the room where it happens, where those decisions are made. So what have been kind of the strides that you have seen primarily in your publishing house, but just what you hear in the industry as a whole also because we talk. Publishing folks talk. So, it would be nice to hear, it's definitely specifically Macmillan, but just out in the effort, what other strategies you have been hearing to
So
help.
when you say strategies, what do you mean specifically? Because
So, like, are there mentorship programs? Are there, like, mentorship, internships, special kinds of training courses, especially one of the good things or positive things about this pandemic has shown how you can reach people outside of the New York area to enter
Mhm.
the publishing space. So, and I'm just going to shout out Piper Hughley, who mentioned HBCUs and going there and doing outreach there. So, are there any kind of, not systemic, that's not what I want to say, infrastructure things that are happening in publishing in your publishing house or just that you hear just from other folks talking? Do you hear any kind of programs like that,
Yeah.
especially with women publishers or editors and um, public production side folks?
Right. So several things. In terms of training, that yes, training has been happening, and it's been happening from the executive level down, you know, because you can't just have, one group in training about this and not. So there's been like everything from, of course, voluntary to mandatory training that's been going on, and that is ongoing. And the training is not just kind of sit at your computer. It's like you're in a cohort. It's a 3 hour thing, and you're doing it over a certain amount of time, and and it's active, and you have to participate and engage and speak to one another and be broken out into groups and everything. So it can feel pretty intense, actually. But this is an intense subject. So that's ongoing. And then in terms of outreach, so there's two things. There was a lot of kind of like restructuring and looking at what we do in terms of actually outreach to candidates, where we're doing our outreach, etc. And that's something that's continuing to evolve. So there's an outward facing thing in terms of like how we're reaching out to people to bring them into the company, and not just going through the usual pipelines that weren't doing anything to increase diversity. And then also, how we retain people who work here. So providing mentoring, programs. So we do have that. We And then also even just going through the change of how we do our review process, how managers are being trained, especially during this pandemic, how we are being trained to support you know the people who work for us and report directly to us. The outreach to schools like that is we actually have something called the Education Outreach Committee, and that was something that was originally came out of the DEI Council, of which I was a co-chair. And even though that has like changed now, we actually have a director of DEI and a manager. So we hired somebody whose specific job is to come in and do this work for the company. And what they do is they go to different, it's usually colleges, and sometimes high schools, usually like I would say 11th to 12th grade and up. And then it also our internship programs, as well. So I know I'm missing a ton of other different things. There's also the establishment of the ERGs. So we now have different groups have been able to start their own employee resource groups, which are supported on the corporate level. So I'm part of BAG, which is the Black and African American group. We have the Latinx group. We have basically anybody who wants to start an ERG. They, can put their proposals together. They get funded for whatever programming they want to do, etc. So that's been great. I mean, I've been there 20 some years, and we never had an ERG, ERGs or groups like that. So it's been really, really nice. And we saw Alvin Ailey and, we're doing all these like great stuff. So it's really great. Everything from how we're looking at how we recruit to how kind of the support and community that's being provided within the company, as well. And like I said, there's still a lot to be done, I do like the fact that we have a lot to say as employees and like what we want to see happen. And it's a very vocal group of people. so those are just like a few things that I see happening. And then my job specifically at St. Martin's, VP Editorial Director of Acquisitions Outreach. That title is something I, proposed and said, this is what I want to do. And my main job under that title is to help continue to diversify all of our key imprints for SMPG, specifically. And I just hired now a manager of acquisitions outreach. So, I have staff.
You have support to do what you need to do.
Yes, yes. And so we just rolled out our whole programming for 2022 just for S&P, and this is with the full support of, my publisher and my SVP and, and everybody's, involved because that's the way it has to be.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know if
Wow.
that answers it.
That is so good to know that they are supporting, at
Mhm.
least at Macmillan, what they say, what they were saying, and to hear, you know, that evolution from when you started about how, there wasn't that infrastructure in place, and now it is, and it's
Mhm.
being built upon. So that's really exciting, um, from an editorial standpoint, from
Mhm.
an author standpoint, and really, honestly, from a reader standpoint, because I can only imagine what we're going to be getting down the pipeline. So I'm excited
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
I have one more question for me, and then we'll turn it to the Q&A. What has been your dearest your dearest accomplishment to date so far professionally?
Oh wow. I That is hard to say. I mean, I usually always turn to the books that I publish, right?
Mhm.
So I'm proud of all of my books, Um, I'm proud every time I publish, somebody who's underrepresented. I'm proud every time I publish a Black person, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm really proud when I publish them successfully, like meaning like, the sales are fantastic, or I get them on the New York Times bestseller list, or they become award winners, or hopefully all of the above.
Yeah.
So I would have to say there is no one moment, um, because I don't even know if I would be able to do the job if there was just kind of like one moment that I was most proud of.
Right. Yeah.
I need you kind of do this work, and you want to be always accomplishing new things for your authors. So for me, it is when I publish, my authors well, and they succeed. That is hands down, is never going to change. That is my biggest high.
Yes. And we are just so excited that we have had you as an advocate, for as long as we have. I can just say personally, when I was a baby author, I came down to the Harlem Book Fair on a whim. Just got on a bus from Boston and came down, and one of the first authors I met was L.A. Banks. Rest in peace.
Yes.
And I was like, Miss Banks, I don't know what I'm doing. I just released a book independently, blah, 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 blah. And she said, you should go talk to Miss Monique Patterson. She's my editor. I said, okay. And I did. And you gave me your card. And I emailed you. You did not respond. That was okay because it was about me having the courage to even email you. And then here we are now.
Yes. And I'm so sorry I didn't
And
respond.
I said, great. Can you be a speaker at our festival? And you said yes. And I'm just like, you see how things come full circle? Don't it
Yes.
do? Don't it do? Just, I appreciate you being here with us. And now we're going to head to the Q&A. So one of the first questions is, do you think the industry is doing a better job of labeling books by their genre rather than their author's identity, such as sci-fi, fantasy, mystery versus black, gay, woman, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's better. I think it still needs to, we have this is like something we have to constantly get better at. Like you don't not do it and then start doing it and do it perfectly. So I there's that is and the thing is that it's not just kind of like this is how you do it and this is not how you do it, right? Well, it kind of is, but yes. So I always remember when back in the day when Borders was around.
Hmm.
Borders used to have you. Do you remember this? They had the section
Absolutely.
African American section and
And I
everything.
remember you had Toni Morrison right next to Zane. And I was just like, wait a minute.
I mean, and the
What is,
cookbooks
what is
and
going
everything.
on?
Everything was just. in there, and you
I
just be
wanted romance, so obviously I went to the romance section. I'm like, "Where's Beverly Jenkins? Where is
like,
where?" They're like, "You need to go to." I'm like, "That makes no sense," but okay, here we go. So,
right. So we've come a long way where I remember saying, it was years ago. I was talking to my publisher at the time, not my current publisher, but Matthew Shear, who I adored, and we were just talking. And I said, Matthew, African American is not a genre.
at all,
And he
not
said,
even, not
he just shook his head. He said, I know. Because that was what we were, everything was being, that was written by Black people and about Black people, just labeled African American. It was like, it's not a genre, you know? So now, yes, you have people going into their categories. Like if you are a sci-fi writer, that's where you go. You go on where people go for sci-fi and fantasy and romance and etc. So that's gotten even better. And I think that's kind of like the most obvious. Now we're actually having the conversations about how people want to be identified, how they want their work to be identified, and talking to authors about that, beforehand, and so that we can kind of continue to be, thoughtful and smart, intelligent, and
right.
empathetic about how we're actually, talking about our authors in the world and how we are identifying our books with readers, because the whole idea of treating different groups as like a monolith that is not the way to do it. It's just not the way to
Right,
do it. Yeah.
exactly. Another question is, what do you contribute to your success as a Black woman within the industry?
The first word that popped into my head was endurance.
Come on, second word might be resilience.
The ability to endure.
Stubbornness. Let's just add that one too.
um,
Defiance.
yeah, you know, um, yeah, in endurance. Honestly, enjoy.
Yeah,
I'm not someone who can continue to do something if I don't find joy in it.
right.
I'm not here to just endure life.
Come on.
And when you are publishing authors, you cannot do this job. I remember one of my first bosses told me, she says, you can't do this job unless you love it. And it's true. It requires too much of you. It requires so much of your brain space and your time, and you edit at home, and there's a lot of time of your personal life that you give to these books. And honestly, I don't see how you do it otherwise, because I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with books. I'm obsessed with, I'll go to a movie and I'm editing the movie, like I walk around and I'm like, oh, that's a great book cover. Like it lives in me. Like that is something it is an obsession. And I don't know of any other way to do it except to be obsessed with it and to do it well. So there is joy, as well. That's a really key component, and you find a way to have that in your work, or you should be doing something else. Quite honestly, is if you can do something that brings you joy.
I think that's really interesting that you're saying that from the editorial side, because I know that's something we say from the author side. We have to find joy in what we do.
Right.
Otherwise, why do it? Because
Right.
this is hard and often it's lonely.
Mhm.
You get into silos. So I think that the fact that there's synergy and that both sides seem to find joy in that,
Mhm.
that's going to stick with me. So thank you for that one, for that answer. That one was right on the money.
Mhm.
And I think we have only one more question. So, what are some damaging myths you think we hear about the industry that stopping us from taking risks? And I think she means us as authors, from your perspective as an editor,
Right.
and particularly us as Black authors.
Right. So some dangerous myths.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. I think that the myth that the thing is that it's not really a myth, right? But it's also not 100% true, right? So I was going to say, the myth that this space, this publishing industry, is not meant for us, you know. But you can't really call it a myth when the industry has behaved that way.
Right, right.
So, but so it's not a myth. It's just something that I would say to every single writer that um, there is space for you, you know, and quite frankly, if these major publishers don't want to give you the space, you can now take the space that you need. Like that's just the truth. Like don't sit there and think that that is the only way to do it. Like this business has evolved to a place where you do not have to only come through a traditional publisher. You can make your way successfully on your own as well. You know, it's just a different kind of hard, you know.
It's a different
Um,
kind of hard.
it's
Oh,
a different kind of hard, but the thing is that if this is your gift, if this is your talent, do not let anybody tell you that it is worthy or not worthy. You know, like it's not up to them to tell you whether it belongs in the world or not. This is your gift and your talent, and there are the means by which you can get your voice out into the world is not just the publishers and or the literary agents or anything like that. You have ways of getting your voice out into the world. So, and just to let you know, we can go a little extra because I gave them. I told them I was like I'm gonna be a little late. So
okay. Oh. Yay. It's funny because that was actually one of my questions about how do you think indie publishing has affected traditional publishing, and what are some things that you think traditional publishing can learn and incorporate from indie publishing? So one, I'm just really glad that you highlighted the indie route because I remember when I first published my book independently, there was a lot of just anti-conversation. I'm not listening to you because I have a plan, and you're not going to derail me from that plan. But now to hear somebody, especially somebody in your position, say, "Do what you need to do," it just encouraging. So thank you. But yeah, so what do just what do you think, especially now that folks really are seeing just the powerhouse that folks are, especially indie. And I want to again shout out Harlem Book Fair because there were so many indie authors at that book fair, and I was just so like, wow, this is amazing.
yeah,
But yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, look, a lot of the Black authors that I signed up when I first came to St. Martin's were indie authors, you know. So and especially with Black authors, they were a lot of them were again they were like kicking down the doors. This is before ebooks,
Hmm.
and they were out there self-publishing and selling lots of copies. You know, those street vendors were out there, man. They were selling those books, and that's how I came to discover a lot of writers. Some of whom I went on to publish
Hmm.
was, yo, you hit up those street vendors. I'm out in Brooklyn downtown, and I would be like, oh, what you got, man? You know, and I just get my fix from this dude on the corner, but with books, you know, and Black writers, you know, of course, back then were having a hard time getting their foot through the door. So they self published physical copies, not even ebooks, you know. So they were way ahead of,
Way ahead.
of everybody else in terms of getting on that indie game. And what they ended up doing was proving to the major publishers or traditional publishers that first of all, we read a whole lot of different things. um, and two, just kind of like the breadth and depth of the Black reading audience, you know, and of Black writers, you
Right.
know. And I think that indie authors continue to show publishers what is possible in this space. I think they continue to do that.
Yeah. So well, I know you gave us extra time, so unless there are any other questions in the chat, to where? Oh, okay, I see them. All right. One question is this: what can we as readers of color do more of to help? Sorry, it's late for me. I'm sorry. What can we as readers of color do more of to help authors of color? I was gonna get it, y'all.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Let me tell you. So, first of all, um, write reviews for authors. Go on Amazon, write reviews, go on Goodreads, write reviews. It affects the algorithm when you review an author. It affects their algorithm of like surfacing these, these authors. So please, definitely support them with writing a review on those platforms, barnesandnoble.com, Amazon, Goodreads, etc. Number two, start buying those books week one. The way that people get on to the bestseller list, it has to do with volume and velocity of sales in a week. Usually it's the first week that the book goes on sale. So when you see a book that's on the New York Times bestseller list, it's because a certain amount of copies got bought in that first week that launched them onto the bestseller list. So be getting into that habit of pre-ordering books that you want, and buying them in that first week, second week on sale really, really helps because they see that volume, they see that pop, get them onto the bestseller list. It makes a big difference, and tell your friends, like tell people, oh, you really need to get this book. Sure, buy an extra copy, like either buy them an extra copy or encourage them to buy their own, like support other people, encourage them to, buy the book as much as possible, whether it's the ebook, the audio book, etc. Those are some ways in which, I think some really like kind of just top line ways that you can support authors.
And I will also add, go to your local library and request that they purchase the book
Yes.
also.
Yes.
Because some of my dearest relationships have been with librarians.
Mm-hmm.
And I have books in like in Iowa and in Idaho. And I'm like, what is going on? But libraries, man, talk about accessibility. You really, 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 really need to encourage readership in libraries because some of these books are expensive. I'm looking at Amazon and like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that book would not have been at the price point it is, but
Mm-hmm.
here we are. So that is a great way to get those books accessible to folks who might not be able to afford a $10 book, a $10 ebook at that, never mind the print book. So yes, but all of those points that Monique mentioned, please do. They are very, very helpful. And word of mouth is still the best way to help and support your authors.
Another one, support Black book sellers.
Yes, like Turning Page Bookshop
Mm-hmm.
down in Goose Creek for us Charleston folks.
Mm-hmm.
Support. So yes, definitely do that. And
Yes.
then we will have this will be our final question. Um, Based on the projects you have seen come across your desk, is there anything you would like to see more from anyone, but particularly from authors of color?
Oh, that is, I don't even know if I have enough time to answer. There's so many things that I want to see. I actually, I'm not lying. I actually have slides of what I want to see. That's like what I walk into a meeting with an agent with, and I'm like, here are the things and categories of things that I want to see. So there's a lot. So I'll try and say it quickly. So I publish a lot of women's fiction, which includes romance, and quite frankly, even like if it doesn't go strictly in the romance section, I love a good, strong love story in my
Mm-hmm.
book. So anything you send me, love story at the core, that's what I want. But I would say that there's, a wide range of commercial fiction that I would love to see. Um, you know, and more rom-coms that could publish in like a really big way. I want more books of what I call are like the sagas, so the homegoings of the world, and historical books like the known world, and um, I want but and those are actually kind of literary. I want the commercial editions
The
of those.
commercial version
I
of
want the
those.
commercial versions of those. I want some very mainstream, uh, fantasy, and paranormal and contemporary paranormal. I want some more of that. Um, LA Banks. You mentioned LA Banks. She and I started working together because her agent at the time. We had lunch, and I said, I really want a Black Buffy, and he was like, I have somebody who can do it. And of course, she put a whole spin on that that had nothing to
Okay,
do with Buffy.
come on now. She said, okay, that's all you want? I can give you more than that.
But that was, I was just like, I want a kick-ass Black female vampire hunter, and she created her whole, a whole mythology around that, that was rooted in, Black culture and African culture, and so, I want more, I want to see more of that, and I want to publish more of that. So I think that's the fastest way I could say it.
Okay.
I can go into so much. I can have a whole different. You could have me back for a whole different panel, and I can do whole
Have you
hour.
back? Monique, we have witnesses. So
Yes.
you will be getting an email. Don't you worry, ma'am. We got you. So real quick, just to confirm, to submit to you, people have to have an agent, or can they? Is there like a does St. Martin's have submission calls or things like that, or that's in the works? Yeah.
Yeah, they ask you to query first. I mean, for me, when I speak at a panel like this, I do open the doors so we can actually follow up where you can share some information where people who want to submit to me, like
Okay.
how the details of that. So usually when I speak at a panel, I usually open up, and say people who are here at the panel, or that especially if I have a meeting with you, like you'll be able to submit to me. And so in that particular place, no, you don't need
Okay.
anything. So if I know you,
Right.
like we in
Right.
the same, then I'll just tell you like how to send it to me, and you can send it to me. So don't worry about having an agent.
Okay, excellent. And we will put that information in the announcements for attendees, especially if you haven't signed up to pitch to Miss Monique, because we do have spots open still to pitch to her. So definitely sign up for that as well. But yes, we are at time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I have learned so much. I hope our attendees have learned so much and just are inspired to go out and amplify their Black voices. And hopefully, they will use Macmillan to do that.
Yes.
So, thank you so much for your time, Monique. And we look forward to seeing you again on Saturday, which is when she will be accepting pictures. So, please sign up. Deadline is tomorrow at noon.
All right. Thank
All
you
right. Have a
all.
good night, everyone.